G'day, my name is Scott Wimble, and this is a video on the question of can historical artefacts contain bias? This is a question many of my students have asked over the years and struggled with, and I've developed an analogy to use with them that has been quite helpful. In fact, it's probably more than an analogy. What we do is we grab two historical artefacts and we journey through time together, seeing what happens to each artefact and asking the question, is there any bias involved here? So if you'd like, come along on the journey with me and we'll see what happens. Do. Whose cup is it anyway? Sorry about that. The production value of the new company isn't like the old. Anyway, let's get down to business. What artifacts will we use? Usually, I use cups. So let's not waste any time. Let's meet contestant number one. Contestant number one here is a cup owned by a 12th century European lord. It's a beauty. Gold, jewel encrusted goblet. Stands about yay high. Stunning. It's been crafted with the utmost care. The lip perfect for pouring ceremonial wine into. This thing is a keeper. And that's right, that's exactly what the Lord does with it. Keeps it. Fantastic. Let's have a look at our second candidate here. This is a wooden cup made for a peasant during the 12th century Europe. It's made of wood and it's for drinking. Now, let's start by looking at the average day for our cups. We'll begin with our wooden peasant's mug over here. Let's have a look at what happens. The peasant mug's day will start quite early, when the peasant will get up and they'll use the cup to drink out of. Now, 12th century European peasants really couldn't trust the water. So perhaps what was actually in this cup was not pure mountain spring of fresh water, but perhaps a form of very weak beer, which many peasants drank to stave off illness, obviously. Now, the family that's there, they're not particularly well off, so many times the cup is used, not just for the one person, but for multiple people, and they'll drink out of it repeatedly throughout the day. So, the average day for our peasant's mug, use, and lots of it. But it's wood, it's sturdy, it stays in there. Now let's see what happens with our goblet, shall we? Our 12th century European lord's goblet. The day will probably start in the lord's treasury, sitting there maybe next to a couple of golden plates, platinum, silver perhaps. And it will sit there. That's pretty much the day, the average day for the goblet. Not much use at all for that. It's probably actually used a couple of times a year for religious ceremonies or special occasions. Another king comes to visit perhaps. Aunt Maud comes down to stay. Regardless, it doesn't get much use at all. Perhaps a highly trained assistant will come and dust it. But really, this goblet's pretty much just sitting on the shelf, securely, doing nothing. Now, assuming things continue as they have been going, what's going to happen is our peasant's mug is going to get used to death. It'll eventually wear out. Perhaps the fermentation in the beer will start affecting the inside of it, or simply the wood will start to thin and it will crack. And what's going to happen to our mug? It'll simply get thrown out or into the fire and will be no more. So there's quite an ignominious end for our European mug. Yet the goblet, quite obviously, continues on. In fact, it lasts a lot longer than the European mug. It stays safe and secure in a treasury with the rest of a whole bunch of treasures of this king. Now, perhaps the king offends another king and is invaded. Now, even if he loses his throne, there's actually a pretty good chance that cup, because it's beautifully crafted and made, is simply going to get transferred from one king's treasure storehouse to another's. And it's going to stay in that treasure storehouse being used a couple of times a year. So you can see by following our two contestant stories through history that there is in fact a bias contained in the artefacts that we find from history. It's actually almost overall a bias towards the rich and the well-known. Now this isn't necessary, it's not some conspiracy. It's simply common sense if you step back and think about it. Rich people could read and write. So almost all of the writings we have from history are from rich people, because they had the time and the money to be educated. Rich people didn't have to work as much as poor people, so they had more time for conquest, for exploration, for political intrigues, for forming governments. Rich people had better stuff, better made things that were used less. So obviously the artifacts that we find are usually from them. Often the best artifacts that we find are buried as part of a religious ceremony with people who are quite well off. Most of our jewellery comes from that. Compare that to the poor of history, who often work 12, 14, 16, 18 hours a day. Were illiterate, had stuff that was poorly made, and that stuff was used to death. So we have a recipe here in history for a natural kind of ingrained bias in most of what we see towards the kind of upper echelons of society and against the lower echelons. So that is hopefully a helpful kind of story / journey / analogy on how we can think about whether there is bias contained in the artifacts that we find in history. Thanks for joining me.